The Rules Committee will come to order. We're here for consideration of H.R. 2584, the Department of the Interior, Environment and Related Agencies Appropriation Act, fiscal 2012. We're happy to welcome the chairman of the subcommittee and the ranking member. Gentlemen, if you have any prepared statement, without objection, it'll appear in the record in its entirety, and we welcome your summary. Thanks for being here.
You bet. It's nice to be with you, and thank you for having us here today to the Rules Committee to talk about the Interior and Related Agencies Appropriation Budget. Each of you is well aware that the committee has made some difficult choices preparing this bill. As reported by the Appropriations Committee, the fiscal year 2012 Interior and Environment Bill is funded at $27.5 billion, which is $2.1 billion or 7% below the FY11 enacted level, or $3.8 billion or 12% below the budget request. Overall funding in this bill is essentially level with fiscal year 2009 funding. In the interest of time, I won't outline all of the programs and activities funded in this bill, but would like to point out a few of the highlights. While the bill makes significant spending reductions across many agencies and programs, it does provide ample funding for key accounts supported by a bipartisan cross-section of members. For instance, fire suppression at the Department of Interior and the Forest Service is fully funded at the 10-year average. The bill includes increased funding for the Bureau of Ocean and Energy Management to hire new inspectors and move forward with offshore oil and gas permitting and leasing while also improving safety. And members will be pleased to know that the operations of our national parks are sustained at levels only slightly below last year, which means every park unit in the country will be operational and fully staffed without the threat of furloughs or layoffs. Finally, this bill also makes critical investments in Indian country, an area of particularly interest to members of this subcommittee. Building upon efforts begun by Mr. Dix and Mr. Moran in the past, this bill continues to make investments in human health and wellness programs in Indian country affecting Indian health, education, and self-determination. We are living at a time when the federal government borrows more than 40 cents on every dollar we spend. We are also living at a time of record deficits and debts. While reductions in discretionary spending alone will not totally erase that deficit, we all know that reducing federal spending is a necessary first step. One of the major underlying themes of this year's work is the sheer volume of regulatory actions being pursued by agencies in the absence of legislation without clear-cut congressional discretion. My concern about the EPA's unrestricted effort to regulate greenhouse gases and the pursuit of an overly aggressive regulatory agenda are well documented. I believe that they are signs of an agency that has lost its bearing. Wherever I go, the biggest complaint I hear about the federal government is about how the EPA is creating economic uncertainty and killing jobs. This isn't a partisan issue. Members of both parties have said that the EPA's regulatory actions vastly exceed its authority and congressional intent. The responsibility to determine whether or not to expand authority rests solely with Congress and not with the EPA. We saw during consideration of H.R. 1, and we'll see again on the House floor, even more efforts to rein in the EPA. The committee has worked very closely with the Energy and Commerce Committee and other authorizing committees on each of the policy provisions of this bill. I know some of my Democrat friends will be especially critical of the spending reductions to the EPA accounts. While we all recognize the importance of the clean drinking water and safe drinking water state revolving funds, we all know that funding them, as we have in the past, is not possible. We need to find a better long-term funding source for water infrastructure projects. It's also worthy pointing out that these accounts received $6 billion in Recovery Act funds in 2009 and still have over $3 billion available in unobligated funding. That's $3 billion still available in unobligated funding. In calendar year 2009, the EPA received over $25 billion in combined stimulus funding and regular appropriations. So it should come as no surprise that the funding for the EPA is reduced by $1.5 billion or 18% from current levels. Much will be said today about the subcommittee's allocation and the policy provisions in this bill, but just remember, at the end of the day, what this committee is attempting to do is all about reducing spending, creating more certainty in the marketplace, and promoting an economic environment conducive to job growth. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd be happy to answer any questions that the committee members may have.
Mr. Brand. Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. I will say at the outset that, as you know, Chairman Simpson is a good man, and personally, I trust he would share the thought that we enjoy working with each other. He's got good staff. I have wonderful staff, but notwithstanding all that, I strongly oppose H.R. 2584. I do support Chairman Simpson's request, which I trust will be for an open rule. But in fact, I would like for you to make this a real open rule and not protect the numerous controversial legislative riders in the bill from points of order under Clause 2 of Rule 21, because they should be subject to points of order. These are legislative provisions that took years in many cases to develop, with countless hours of testimony and witnesses, and then this bill would wipe many of them out in one fell swoop without adequate consideration. H.R. 2584 is more than $2 billion below the FY11 appropriations level and almost $4 billion below the President's request. It's even $300 million below the level of H.R. 1 that was passed by the House in February. As substantial and harmful as these spending reductions are, what is most disappointing is the breathtaking array of special interest legislative riders and funding limitations that are included in this bill. Controversial provisions include 36 different funding limitations and 14 legislative riders, totaling more than 40 pages of actual legislative bill text. Just based on the number of pages, the text of this appropriations bill is larger than the FY11 Defense Appropriations Act. I don't object to the bill carrying provisions that have been in there for many years, but regular order should not mean that whole legislative texts can be dumped into appropriation bills. I'm very much concerned that these riders and funding limitations have nothing to do with deficit reduction and everything to do with carrying out an ideological agenda. We have enough to debate with the funding allocations made by H.R. 2584. We don't need to weigh down this bill with very controversial and, in so many cases, destructive riders that should be dealt with in the authorizing committees and not the Appropriations Committee. We owe it to our constituents and our communities to protect the air we breathe, the water we drink, to protect public health from the dangers of mercury, arsenic, lead, and to be good stewards of the abundant natural and cultural heritage that's been passed down to us. Future generations will judge us on how well we carry out these responsibilities. So, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your consideration of a true open rule for H.R. 2584. I thank you and the members of the Rules Committee for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moran. And I have to say that it was a fascinating juxtaposition to listen to your passionate opposition to the bill and your equally passionate praise of Mr. Simpson and his staff. So I think that was nice to see. Let me just say that we are looking to offer an open rule on this, and as you know, appropriations are privileged resolutions. They don't need to come to this Rules Committee. So if we were to do what you're proposing, there would be no reason for this meeting to take place because an appropriations bill, being privileged, could go directly to the floor. But it has been a tradition that the measures that your committee reports out are protected as the process moves forward. And so I just want to say that I hope very much that the scenario that you outlined as a potential, I mean, jeopardizing our water and all, does not happen. I don't think that Mr. Simpson, and I know that I come from Los Angeles, he's from Idaho, we're both from out west. That has nothing to do with your desire to drink clean water, but we enjoy the environment, we appreciate it greatly, and utilize it. And I happen to believe that the thoughtful approach that they have taken will ensure that some of the scenarios that you've outlined, I can't say with absolute certainty, but that what you've outlined is not the case. And I don't know if you want to respond at all to that, Mr. Simpson.
Well, I appreciate the Chairman's comments, and Ranking Member Moran is right. We do have a good working relationship and enjoy working together, both our staffs and Mr. Moran and myself. We do have a difference of opinion on some of these things. I would tell you that every legislative rider that has been put in here or funding limitation that has been put in here has been cleared through the authorizing committees. I think we've taken extraordinary steps to work with the authorizing committees on anything that has been proposed that's in this bill. I said during my statement that I think one of the biggest drawbacks to our economy, one of the biggest wet blankets on our economy, is more so than tax rates or anything else, is the uncertainty of the regulatory burden that's being proposed by federal agencies at this time. And the biggest one is the EPA. Wherever I go, I will give speeches and talk about the Interior bill and what we're doing in it and so forth, and I say we also fund the EPA in this bill. Somebody in the audience, doesn't matter where it is, somebody in the audience will say, defund them, just get rid of them. And that's the first applause line in the whole speech. Problem is, you can't do that because there are certain requirements, the underlying laws that they have to fulfill. And so you do need them to be there, and so we haven't completely defunded them. But as I said in my opening statement, when you look at the nobody wants dirty water or dirty air, but when you look at how we fund the state revolving loan funds for clean drinking water and for clean water, we're not going to, increasing the appropriation is not going to address the backlog of problems out there. We've got to find a different way to fund those sources. We simply don't have the money to put into that, and consequently, when you look at the total deficit and debt we're facing, we had to make some tough choices. There's no doubt about it. But I think we also have to free up our economy so that the private sector can create the jobs we need that will ultimately lead to a better economy and a better federal budget.
Thank you very much. Ms. Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate both of you being here today and your good work, and I have no questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, I do have some questions here. I noticed that the title we have for this legislation is Auctioning Off the Grand Canyon and Other National Treasures to State-Owned Mining Companies in Russia and South Korea. I don't find that a particular crowd pleaser here. And I have some questions actually about that. How do the taxpayers benefit from allowing uranium mining at the Grand Canyon?
This does not allow uranium mining in the Grand Canyon.
What does it allow?
The Secretary withdrew over 1 million acres of land from potential uranium mining and other mining on the outskirts of the Grand Canyon. Withdrew it. It was an administrative decision, didn't go through Congress, didn't public hearings, none of that kind of stuff. What this does is say that the Secretary can't unilaterally withdraw this land, that it has to go through Congress and be approved by Congress to withdraw it.
Well,
it does not allow uranium mining.
What is the issue of selling or allowing the mining to go to Russia and to other countries?
There are international companies that mine all over the United States, as the United States companies mine all over the rest of the world.
And what does the taxpayer get for it, which is what I'd asked, one of the things that's very important.
The taxpayers get the royalties and the mining.
Which have not changed since, what, 1890 something?
1872.
1872. So what are they paying us, about 2 cents an acre?
I'm not sure what.
For uranium?
You'd be better off to ask the Resources Committee that, what the exact thing is, what the exact payment is.
You consider the Grand Canyon to be a national treasure?
Oh, yeah.
And a landmark? Who owns most of the mining companies around the Grand Canyon?
I have no idea.
They're not American-owned? Would you agree with that?
I wouldn't know.
Shouldn't you know on your committee?
I don't know who owns the mining claims in any part of the country except for those that I happen to be familiar with.
Do you know, have any idea how taxpayers are compensated? Or if they are?
Through the royalties that are paid by them.
Which are still, when were they, Mr. Moran, 1872?
1872. Basically, the uranium would be taken from publicly owned lands for free.
Free. Okay. So how many people would you say, roughly, Mr. Moran, rely on that drinking water from the Grand Canyon's watershed?
Well, I don't know. It's more than I could possibly calculate. It is a Korean firm. The concern was that it's on the periphery of the Grand Canyon. It's publicly owned land, and it would possibly pollute the land, the water that runs through the Grand Canyon.
Let me say, a little quote here, that one of my heroes who used to serve here, Maurice Udall from Utah, said, he's a late member of the House. Arizona, excuse me, he was born in Utah. The more we exploit nature, the more our options are reduced until we have only one, to fight for survival. And I think our cavalier treatment this past year over the drinking water, taking EPA out of Clean Water Act and all the other things is going to bring us to that water war. And we're very particular about that. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to put the administration's policy into the record. They will veto this bill in its present form. And then I noticed Mr. Hastings wrote a letter and then withdrew of his great concern about waivers of points of order. And obviously, some of the things that you are doing are legislating on appropriations bills without doubt. Despite the fact that he withdrew it, I would like to take up the cudgel on Mr. Hastings' bill and say I think this is greatly overdone here as well, very much concerned about it. I think what, as Mr. Simpson said, what the purpose of his committee is, that more or less is to wipe off the environment. Not interested in that. Underfunding things, nobody has any oversight. And I don't think America will appreciate
I would think,
that.
I did not say that, and I think that
Well, I
is an
think, as I
extreme point
recall,
of
you
view.
said that you had to make the economy good, right?
We have to make some tough decisions.
Well, what your first sentence there was, not a piece of it was to protect the environment or the resources of the United States. And I just want to say, as a member of Congress, I consider that to be one of your top things
As do
that
I.
you should be doing.
As do I.
All right, well, the National Endowment for the Arts. Every dollar we spend, which is not much here, we get $9 back. And yet the most incredible cut has been taken to the NEA, and does no mention of really what it does for us. It's an economic engine wherever it is. So I just want to also state my great regret to see that cut to the arts. And I thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question
If I
for
could
Mr.
respond to the
Bishop.
arts question, Mr. Chairman, I agree with you. I'm a supporter of the National Endowment for the Arts and National Endowment for the Humanities. Fact is, we don't have the money. That's just the fact. We borrow 40 cents on every dollar. There will be efforts on the floor, I am certain, to take the $135 million out of the National Endowment for the Arts, maybe even the National Endowment for the Humanities. I will fight those efforts. But we did have to make some tough choices.
I understand that. Frankly, I would still like to get a little revenue coming in, maybe have some millionaires pay a little bit. But I reserve my next question for Mr. Bishop when after he speaks. Mr. Bishop of New York.
Oh, come on.
I've already asked you a question.
And I told you I still hate the humidity here. I had not intended, actually I have about 4 hours of questions for you for this bill.
Why did I know that was,
I know.
you're not kidding.
Actually, Mr. Simpson, it's a good start. Haven't gone nearly far enough, but it is a good start. But I would like to ask a couple of questions since Ms. Slaughter brought the subject up, especially going back to the issue about uranium mining, since I think I'm probably the only one here that actually listened to the hearing on that particular issue a couple of years ago when it was first brought up. Before Secretary Salazar did his unilateral action of withdrawing those lots, who had established the procedure, the process, and the arrangement?
I don't.
Would it surprise you if I said it was Mr. Udall of Arizona who came up with that policy? That was his compromise legacy, and that's what Secretary Salazar overturned when he came up with it? Would it surprise anyone to know that the Arizona Department came and actually testified as to what it does and does not do to water quality in the Grand Canyon, and their conclusion was it does nothing to the water quality in the Grand Canyon? So I think I've heard a lot of accusations here. I think sometimes Secretary Stuart Udall and Congressman Mo Udall would be amazed how much we do in their names when it was the exact opposite of what they did when they were actually here at some time. How much land does the federal government already own in this country?
Oh, you probably know that better than me. I can't remember. I'd be off. It's
Say 1 out of every 3 acres.
something like that, yeah.
Yeah, 1 out of every 3 acres. For us in the West, nothing personal to my good friend from New York or the gentleman from Virginia who don't really have any federal lands in their state of which to speak. They have some state lands which you manage very well, but the federal government we're talking. It's amazing because the federal government didn't take that over because the state was so efficient in what they were doing. But those of us west of Denver, how much of our property is owned by the federal government?
In Idaho, it's 64%. That means 2 out of every 3 acres in Idaho is owned by the federal government. That means we can't collect taxes. That means we can't put money into our schools from taxes that we get because it's not privately owned.
Wait, you're getting ahead of me here.
Okay.
Because you're a miser. You don't have that much public land in Idaho compared to Nevada and Alaska and Utah. It's 51%. 4% of those east of Denver, 4% of the land east of Denver is owned by the federal government, 51%. Which is why I ask you, which states of this nation have the hardest time funding their education system? Now you can answer the question if you want.
Those states that have public lands, because we cannot tax them as you would as if they were if they were private lands. And if you look at payment in lieu of taxes and other things, they don't come anywhere near substituting what it would be if it was on the tax rolls. So consequently, I got a county. It's 96% federal land. 96% federal land. And if you looked at the money that they get, and it's probably bigger than the state of New Jersey, but if you looked at the money that they get from the federal government to make up for that. A couple of years ago, several years ago, they had to spend money for their search and rescue efforts to take one dead person off of Mount Bora, the highest peak in Idaho. Took their year budget to retrieve this individual. That means everybody else, this is a guy from back east, that means everybody else that needs the help of search and rescue, there was no money there because they've got no way to get those resources. They just don't have the land to tax it. That's one county. But overall, it's 64% of Idaho.
How long has the Endangered Species Act been unauthorized?
20 years.
How come we still have the Endangered Species Act if it's been unauthorized?
You bring up a good question. It's one of the things that the authorizers and our Appropriations Committee have been looking at. 28% of this bill, 28% of it, is in unauthorized programs or where the authorization has expired. During the markup of this, Ranking Member Dix said, well, gee, we've just been funding this for 20 years. Why are you cutting off the funding for listing of new species and critical habitat designations? We've just been doing it for the last 20 years and keep funding it. I said, that's the problem, not the answer. And what we're asking is the resources committees and those other committees of jurisdiction to get busy and start working on reauthorization. What you have is you have organizations that like the way it is and won't come to the table because they've got everything they want now, so you can't negotiate a reauthorization with somebody that's not willing to come to the table. What we're saying is we need to get all of the stakeholders together, the committees of jurisdiction do, and start reauthorizing some of these programs that have gone on without, that have been funded without congressional authorization.
In your vocabulary, would you have called a program funded year after year after year without reauthorization a rider?
Probably so, yeah.
So would I. So would Chairman Pombo when he tried to come last time I was on the Rules Committee and ask that the point of order not be waived against some of these types of concepts that have been here year after year, which is why, Mr. Chairman, I'm saying this is a nice first step. You got a long way to go, but this is a nice first step. I yield back.
Well, and if I could answer, one of the things that we said as we talked with the authorizing committees, we can't go in and just defund everything or not fund anything that isn't authorized because it's 28% of the bill. And there are some things that I think all of us don't want to eliminate, but they do need to be reauthorized. What this is really in the endangered species area is kind of a shot across the bow and saying you guys that have a stake in some of these authorizations that have expired need to get to the table, and the authorizing committees need to start working on reauthorization. And it's not just the Resources Committee. It's also true in the Transportation Committee and in the Energy and Commerce Committee and others.
Mr. McGovern.
Thank you very much. And I just want to say the Chairman of the Rules Committee said that appropriations bills don't have to come here, go right to the floor. But it's not the case with this one, if I understand the rules correctly. Given all the legislative riders that are in this bill that are being asked to be protected, you do have to come before the Rules Committee.
Yes. That's exactly what I said.
I want to emphasize
if the gentleman would further yield, I'd just say that what I said in response to Mr. Moran, who said he wanted a truly open rule, and I said the rules of the House state that the Rules Committee doesn't have to have anything to do with the appropriations process at all if they leave, by virtue of that, they leave exposed all of the legislative language that is there. And by tradition, the reason we consider appropriations bills here in the Rules Committee is bipartisan tradition of protecting the work product of the Appropriations Committee. I thank my friend for yielding.
And you know, I think the fact that how many legislative riders are on this bill?
There are about 28. We counted 14 major legislative riders. Many of them just took up the entire law and just dumped it into the appropriations bill.
And am I right that some of these riders, you know, there's a rider which would prohibit the EPA from regulating coal ash produced by power plants as hazardous waste? And
That's
then
correct.
a rider delaying for 1 year EPA regulations on carbon dioxide emissions from stationary industrial sources. Are those?
That would be correct.
And am I also correct that this bill, as it's written, would cut the funding for the Land and Water Conservation Fund by 78% from the current fiscal year?
That's correct.
I just want to say, we're all talking about saving money, but let me tell you about the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which is something I've felt very strongly about and fought for many years. I represent primarily an urban and suburban area, and we have preserved, countless acres of open space in urban areas, which have allowed there to be the creation of parks, which have also been incentives for economic development. People have decided to move to that neighborhood because of the space that has been protected. Businesses have decided to invest in these neighborhoods because of that open space. They have hired people, and there is a ripple effect to this. It's not just taking money and saying, here it is, and there's no benefit. There's a lot of benefit to this, including economic development benefit, the creation of jobs. And one of the ways we're going to get out of this deficit and debt mess is by putting more people back to work. And things like this actually play a role. When you cut it by 78%, that means that's a pretty extreme cut that I think is, again, going to have an adverse impact on our economy. The ranking member of the committee talked about the uranium mining and the administration action, which basically puts a ban on mining claims, and that you're trying to overturn in this. The administration's action, they thought was necessary because the mining of gold, uranium, and other hard rock materials is still governed, as the ranking member mentioned, by a law signed by Ulysses S. Grant in 1872. And the outdated law gives mining companies free and open access to millions of acres of public land in the West, and according to the Congressional Budget Office, allows at least $1 billion in valuable metals to be taken from public land every year without taxpayer compensation. And the administration and members of both sides of the aisle have called for modernizing the law. Now, we're talking about kind of a budget deal or a deal on this debt right now, which includes things like telling my constituents and your constituents that if they're on Social Security, they're not going to get a cost of living adjustment, or we're going to cut back on benefits for Medicare beneficiaries, and we're told that revenues are off the table. Well, I mean, this is, to me, seems like an area where, that needs to be reviewed, where in fact, rather than exploiting these lands with no taxpayer compensation, at least I would think we'd want to see that law change in a way where where we don't continue the same old. I don't quite understand why there's not a greater attention to kind of changing that fact. And I think working with the administration, trying to figure out a sensible way to move forward. The gentle lady also from New York talked about the protection of the Grand Canyon. Does anyone know how many people rely on the drinking water from the Grand Canyon's Colorado River watershed? And is there any effect of uranium mining on the water quality? Anyone?
Well, I can tell you that when the gentleman from Arizona that offered the proposal, and then Mr. Moran offered an amendment to try to strike the proposal, the debate that went on is that no, it would not have any effect on water quality in the Colorado River. And apparently Mr. Bishop says that's the testimony that they received in committee.
Yeah, no, and again, that's why when you're coming up with these riders and putting them on appropriations bills, it seems to me that this is an issue more serious enough that, I'd as much as I respect the gentleman from Utah, I mean, I'd like to get a little bit more scientific information on what the impacts really are.
Let me say, it is the Secretary's actions withdrew this land. The amendment does not say you will mine there. It takes it from a unilateral action by the Secretary and says Congress has to have a say in this. Now, I don't have a problem with that. I think Congress ought to have a say in a lot of things rather than turning over everything to the administrative branch of government. It may be that when they go, if someone applies for a mining claim and they decide to go through the process, that mining claim is denied. But should the Secretary be able to just unilaterally withdraw 1 million acres from any prospecting? I don't think so. You mentioned the 1872 mining law. Am I surprised you? I agree. It needs to be updated. I think it should be. It was done a couple of years ago, never made it through the Senate. But you talk about legislative riders. Let me give you an example of why legislative riders occur on appropriation bills. And there is a provision, Section 5, or Title 5 of this bill, which is an entire law. It was passed by the House of Representatives on a two-thirds vote, more than a two-thirds vote, on suspension. It goes to the Senate. It passes out of the Senate committee on a unanimous vote. And because of the rules of the Senate, one senator puts a hold on it, and it's not considered. So what do people do that want to see this passed? An overwhelming majority of both the House and Senate that want to see this passed? They come to the Appropriations Committee and say, hey, we need to put this in something that must pass. And that's always appropriation bills. And that's why you see the aquatic pesticide provision or that statute in this bill. It's because of the inability, frankly, to get something that actually moves through the Senate or is considered by the Senate.
Well, before I yield to Mr. Moran for his comments, I mean, has every one of these legislative riders been voted on by the House?
No.
No? Okay. Mr. Moran?
Well, thank you, Mr. McGovern. To your first point about uranium mining, the Secretary consulted with a number of his scientific and programmatic advisors. They made a determination that it was potentially harmful to the environment of the Grand Canyon National Park to allow uranium mining by this Korean firm. It wasn't necessarily that they take it for free. I mean, that would seem to be an injustice based upon an archaic law. But it was really an environmental consideration that caused him to withdraw this piece, these basically couple parcels of land. Now, of course, they're in Mr. Flake's district. Mr. Flake made the amendment. It was not included in well, actually, it was included in the bill, wasn't it? You included in the bill. We tried to revert to the Secretary's judgment because we didn't see the kind of scientific backup that would cause us to overturn the Secretary's judgment, and we lost. But I don't think it's necessarily fair to say that we were able to conclude that this could not pollute the water that runs through the Grand Canyon. None of us are scientists. We were the reason we tried to support the Secretary is we knew that his decision was based upon scientific analysis. Ours possibly was based upon other considerations.
Amongst the waivers that are being requested, is there a Cutco waiver in this? Do you need a waiver from Cutco in any of the provisions that?
I can answer that. If there's a stewardship contracting legislation that is still good for another 2 years. The same, Mr. Flake extended it for 10 years. That's in violation of the Budget Committee's restriction on Cutco. You have to pay for it. Stewardship contracting costs more money. It's not paid for, so it's a violation of what they used to be pay-go. They call it Cutco. But again, it's in the bill nevertheless.
So this violates Cutco. We're going to have to waive that.
The gentleman yield.
Gentleman.
I thank my friend for yielding. We will not be waiving Cutco in this measure. We're going to have an amendment to the rule that will, in fact, address the issue so that will not be necessary to provide a waiver.
If I might, when that was put in, when Mr. Flake proposed the amendment, he heard from CBO that it was an $8 million cost, so he had the $8 million cost out of another program, which covered it. And then actually after we adopted it, we learned from CBO that it didn't have a cost, and now apparently the Budget Committee says it does have some provisions. So we're going to have to not waive it, but as Chairman Dreyer suggested, drop it from the...
So you're going to eliminate the provision entirely?
Yeah. The provision that would extend the stewardship contracting for another 10 years. But I was surprised, frankly, that even in debate that there was any objection to it. Either we didn't know at the time that it violated the Cutco because, frankly, people on both sides think this is a good thing.
The gentleman further yield. I'd just like to express my great appreciation to Mr. McGovern for his very, very strong efforts to enforce the Cutco provisions that we have. I thank my friend.
Yeah, I want to make sure we all play by the rules that were.
I agree.
That were set out in the beginning of the of this Congress. Let me just finally say that you know I have my frustrations with the EPA just as much as everybody else here. I mean I'm in battles with them constantly, and usually it's not over the science. it's usually over the cost of implementation. And one of my suggestions and one of my to EPA has always been that we need a quite frankly we need a bigger state revolving fund given the amount of infrastructure problems that we have, at least in my state, and that in terms of implementing clean water standards, which I'm all for, the sole burden shouldn't be on the town or the city or the community, which quite frankly doesn't have the money. But at the end of the day, again, I go back to what I say, the idea of approaching this debt problem by simply cutting, I think misses the point that through investment, you can also create more revenue, more jobs, more opportunity, more economic development, more activity. And in this, in this bill in particular, there are lots of things that I think, are being cut that are going to make it a lot more difficult for there to be the economic growth and the jobs that we all want. So I regret you had the numbers that you had to deal with. I think that's a mistake to begin with. I'm concerned about some of the legislative riders here, which I think will do great damage to the environment, and some of the cuts here, even with agencies that I have problems with. I think this is not the way to go, but I appreciate you being here. Thank you. You're back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've only been here 7 months, Dr. Simpson. This is going to be one of the best Rules Committee meetings I've been to. I hear that folks are concerned about cut go, and here we are. We've solved it halfway into the meeting. Folks are concerned about having the ability to put their mark on what goes on in states far away from their own in Arizona, and your bill has within it a provision that will give Congress more authority over that area and take that away, restore that to us, and I'm excited about that. As my friend Mr. Hastings likes to say, I'd bet cash money that I've spent more nights and hiked more miles in the Grand Canyon than anybody else on this committee. And I've got to tell you, Dr. Simpson, it troubles me that I hear that the Grand Canyon is at risk, because, again, it's where I enjoy spending most of my time. Tell me why it is that Korean and Russian mining companies can operate in that region under different environmental regulations than American mining companies operate.
They have to abide by the same environmental regulations everybody else does.
Oh, so it's the same. The ownership doesn't make any difference whatsoever. Well then, why is it that the uranium mining in Arizona can operate under such permissive rules, while uranium mining in all the other states in our union operates under very, very difficult rules?
I don't know the answer to that, and I don't know if it's true that it is different in Arizona than it is in every place else.
So the uranium mining that's going on in Colorado, in the Colorado River watershed, exactly the same as the uranium mining that's going on in Arizona in the Colorado River
I'm not
watershed.
a mining engineer, so I don't know if it's the same type of mining or not.
I think that's right, Dr. Simpson. And so we've got exactly the same regs under exactly the same set of rules under what is one of the longest watersheds in America. Tell me about this 1872 mining law. Of course, I've only been here 7 months, so I wasn't around for that. If there's broad agreement here that we ought to fix that, why didn't you fix it in this bill?
That's beyond our jurisdiction, I think. There was legislation passed last year, I think it was, or the year before last, by the Resources Committee, went to the Senate, and never made it through the Senate, frankly, because of the opposition of some on the other side of the aisle in the Senate to the reformations that were proposed out of the House bill. And no compromise has been reached. I think everybody pretty much agrees that we need to look at the 1872 mining law. We just haven't come to some resolution on how to make it fit the times yet.
Now, I know the chairman is a big supporter of open rules. If this committee passes an open rule, will I be able then to offer an amendment on the floor to solve that problem?
That would be legislating on an appropriation bill.
So there's absolutely nothing that your committee or this bill can do to solve that problem. That's an authorizer's.
I would say that the authorizing committee needs to do that.
You could add a rider.
Add another rider, like the endangered species rider. Well, I appreciate the work that you do. I do think investment in our natural resources yields great benefits, and we see that each and every day. In the Deep South where I come from, taking care of the environment isn't a government responsibility, it's personal responsibility, and we treat it that way each and every day. I can only imagine what our state would look like if we had to cede 60, 65, 70% of it to someone else to manage rather than our own. As Ms. Slaughter was talking about, the great green spaces in her area, we have those great green spaces in our area. We manage them locally, purchase them locally, control them locally, and it's been a huge boon to investment in our communities. I only hope that one day your state, Dr. Simpson, will have that same local control and you can realize that same benefit of investment, and I suspect that would bring in the additional revenues to the coffers that Ms. Slaughter was talking about earlier.
Will you free me too?
And I'd like to free Utah as well. I'd like to free y'all. I'd like to free y'all. Freedom first. And I thank you, Dr. Simpson.
Well, and I appreciate your comments, and really that's what Mr. Bishop and others have been arguing for years, that we have the same percentage of public lands as other states, that we wouldn't need PILT payments and other things like that. But to tell you the truth, we live in the West because we like our public lands. We like our open spaces, and we like our mountains and forests and those kind of things. When you talk about the Land and Water Conservation Fund, there's a difference of view between those of you, I think, in the East and those of us in the West, where you've got a state that's 64% federal land. So much of the Land and Water Conservation Fund is used to buy land. Now, if you want to buy land in New York or Massachusetts, I don't have a problem with that, because you don't have much public land, or Virginia. But when you go out to Idaho and you want to put more land, county and state parks, not federal land. You have some, but not a lot. But they use so much of the land and water, and I'm a fan of the Land and Water Conservation Fund. I know that'll be much to the chagrin of Mr. Bishop, but it's done great things in Idaho and other places in preserving South Fork of the Snake River. It's beautiful what they've done, and if they had not done that with these conservation funds, there would be little cabins all along the hillside there and through the canyon, and I think people would be upset by that. So they've done great things. But so many Westerners see it as using federal money to buy more land in states that already have 64 or 70% federal land, that they get very nervous about putting more money into buying, the federal government buying more land. So it's kind of a difference of view between those east of the Mississippi and those west of the Mississippi, public land states versus non-public land states.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I guess I sum up simply by saying I just don't like the end run around the legislative process to satisfy some folks' dislike for certain provisions, and their dislike may be based on a number of things, but it doesn't seem right to me, and so I'll leave it at that. Not the work of Mr. Simpson or Mr. Moran, but as Chairman Bill Young put it, some of these policy writers are for attention getting, and some of them have meaningful input. And I come from a state where we do have a lot of federal land. And the biggest concern that I have, that I'm sure that the two of you have, is having clean water. And as I listen, not just in this proceeding, that we all understand what this legislation is, what it does, the riders that are in it. But as I listen to all of the talk in politics about the Environmental Protection Agency, and there are times when either or all of us have argued that they overstep their boundaries in certain areas. But when one group of people take it upon themselves to criticize a specific agency as much as they have been criticized, it kind of halfway tells me that they may be doing a pretty good job. I'll see you later.
Well, if I could just respond to that, I was asked by a reporter that same thing. Does it concern you about the number of EPA riders being proposed and amendments? And as I said to Mr. Moran when we marked it at the subcommittee, you might be surprised that we turned down a lot more than we actually accepted. And then those came in full committee, and there will be more that come on the floor, I'm certain. If there was several ideas or people that had concerns, about what the EPA was doing in a certain area here or there. I might be looking at it and saying, well, they got a specific problem in this area, and maybe their region isn't doing what they want or whatever. But it is broad and it is bipartisan, the concern that I hear everywhere I go, both from Republicans in this Congress and Democrats, of concern, which tells me that you got an agency that has a problem.
Oh, beyond my lifetime, clean water is going to be such an extraordinary fight in this country, and I just think that we ought to all be trying to figure out how to work it out. And apparently, the pitch battles will continue, not only with EPA, but between ourselves, and real soon, state versus state, counties versus counties on water issues are going to be a significant problem. Thank you.
Bullis, no questions. Scott, Mr. Webster, gentlemen, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Open and under process, it would be obvious that we will continue this brief debate on the House floor.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you, members of the committee.
Thank you.
Our next witness is the gentleman from New York, Mr. Bishop. Please come forward, and without objection, any prepared remarks that you have will appear in the record in their entirety. And
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is an appropriate segue given the previous conversation with respect to policy writers. I am here to respectfully request that the Rules Committee not protect Title V of the Interior and Environment Appropriations Act from a point of order in the bill that comes to the floor. Title V, as you heard, is the entire text of the Reducing Regulatory Burdens Act of 2011, H.R. H-72. That bill and that piece of legislation is solely within the jurisdiction of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, more specifically within the jurisdiction of the Water Resources and Environment Subcommittee, which I serve as the ranking member. It's my understanding, long-held rule and tradition of the House that authorizing legislation or advancing authorizing legislation within an appropriations bill is not within the committee jurisdiction of the Committee on Appropriations, and it violates Clause 2B of Rule 21 of the House Rules. And I would suggest that including it in the appropriations bill hinders the opportunity for a piece of legislation to actually become law on this subject. You heard Mr. Simpson say that it came out of committee in the Senate, but there's now a hold on it. That hold is an effort to negotiate first something in the Senate that reasonable people can support, and then have a negotiating position with the House in conference, and including this bill in this language in an appropriations bill, I would suggest is going to hinder those discussions and will in fact make it more difficult for this legislation to take on the force of law. So I respect.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Bishop, and let me say that assuming that the committee supports my recommendation for an open rule for this measure, that will ensure your right to offer an amendment that on the floor that would allow you to have a debate and have a vote on striking the provision that is of concern to you. So your right will be there.
If in fact you do not grant this request, then I will indeed offer an amendment.
Right. Well, I just wanted you to know that we, in offering an open rule, if we do, then you will have that right. So
thank you.
I have no questions. Ms. Fox. No questions. Ms. Slaughter.
Well, I do, and I hope everybody bear with me because it's strictly parochial. I'm concerned about the Great Lakes, and I'm concerned about a part of this bill that blocks EPA funds to states that have strong ballast water standards, and that comes within your committee's jurisdiction, as you mentioned. Now, you know that New York State has increased its ballast water. I don't know how we didn't do it 30 years ago and allow that to all be dumped outside the boundaries of the United States. But in New York, we are the first place that is reached from the Atlantic Ocean down through the St. Lawrence Seaway, then to Lake Ontario, Lake Erie. We have over 180 invasive species that are killing our fishing industry. Now we are fighting about the Asian carp and what to do about it and whether we can, in any case, try to stop that. But this bill, and this part of this bill, says that because we have strong ballast water regulations, that we should not get any money from the EPA. Why in the world would they punish New York State, which basically takes the invasive species for the other lakes, the other four, and trying to save them from getting them? We were deeply concerned about this. We had just heard about it last week. We're hearing a lot from Albany to please try to stop that, because we take it very seriously. We have spent enormous amounts of funds trying to fight those species. In many cases, we don't know what to do about them. But the idea that we would be punished for trying to save the rest of the country or the shipping areas from that is so contrary to what I think we need to do here. I wanted to ask you what you think we can do about it.
Well, I am in full agreement, and assuming we have an open rule, I am prepared to offer an amendment that would strike the La Tourette amendment.
Is that part of 5, or is that separate?
No. Title 5, as I understand it, deals just with the Reducing Regulatory Burdens Act of 2011. But it's my understanding, in Appropriations Committee, in the full committee, Mr. La Tourette offered an amendment that includes the language that you find so difficult, troubling, and frankly, I do as well. And so I plan to offer an amendment to strip that language from the final bill. And I would just say, I know that consistency is overrated, but my head is spinning here. The La Tourette Amendment, under existing law, the National Invasive Species Act provides a federal floor for ballast water and invasive species regulation, and then the states may exceed that floor if they so choose. And what the La Tourette Amendment is doing is saying, no, states can't exceed, they must adhere to the federal floor. We just passed a bill out of the House, H.R. 2018, that eliminates the federal role entirely with respect to enforcing the Clean Water Act and gives primacy to the states. So one part of the Clean Water Act, this body has said the states have primacy, and now in another part of the Clean Water Act, the same general issue, it's saying that the states have no role other than to adhere to the minimum standards established by the federal government. My own view is that the Clean Water Act has worked pretty well in terms of establishing a federal floor and allowing states to exceed that floor if they so choose, if they want to offer additional levels of protection, which is what New York has done with respect to invasive species. I hope that we'll be successful in preserving the ability of New York and other states to maintain the level of protection that each state considers to be appropriate.
The administration statement says that he will veto the bill. We have some fallback. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Ms. Slaughter. I'd like to follow your lead. Ms. Slaughter, you began by saying that you wanted to be very parochial, and I would as well. I'd like to introduce two guests who are here today. We have Jen and Ari Halpern, who are here this afternoon to celebrate their husband and father's birthday. Hugh Halpern, our staff director, is celebrating his birthday today. And so Jen and Ari are here, and so we're very happy to have you both to mark the birthday. Mr. Bishop.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming. And I agree with you. Look, there's a right way to legislate, and there's a wrong way to legislate. And putting all these riders on this bill, I don't think is a wise or smart way to legislate. And and again, as Mr. Simpson said, I mean, we didn't vote on any of these before the full House. It's not like the Senate, has turned them down. We haven't sent them over to them. And why do we have authorizing committees if we're just going to, attach riders to appropriation bills and waive all points of order? It doesn't. I think, but if this is what we're going to do, I'm going to, if Ms. Slaughter's amendment fails, that doesn't eliminate all these riders, then what I will do is offer an amendment I've tried to get made in order time and time again, and that is an amendment to end all U.S. taxpayer subsidies for oil and gas industries. They don't need it. So if we're going to kind of mess up the whole process, we might as well get something at it that makes that benefits the taxpayers of this country. So, but I agree with you, and I look forward to supporting Ms. Slaughter's amendment. Thank you.
Gentlemen, yield?
Yeah, happy to yield.
I'd just ask my friend, based on the statement that has just been made, is it correct for me to surmise then that you would oppose any riders on any appropriations bills that we have at all? Is that the position?
No, but
Thank my friend for yielding.
no, but this is excessive by any measure.
Okay. I just want to make it clear.
Mr. Chairman, if I could take a parochial moment as well. I have in the back corner here Leah Lavelle, who is a student at Marist, which was my high school 22 years ago. Her father is the leader of the absolute largest Republican group in the state of Georgia. But Leah is here to sort those issues out for herself. And I thought, where better than the Rules Committee to be exposed to both sides of the case and be able to sort those things out as a young person. So she's almost anywhere but here. You're thinking, well,
I'd like to offer some recommendations. Welcome. We're very happy to have you. Thank you very much for being here. Please let us know what conclusions you draw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, just very briefly, I gather that policy riders are the new earmarks, and so I guess all of us will learn something along the way, and we'll see more and more of them from Democrats and Republicans.
Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That will conclude the hearing for the Interior Appropriations Bill, and we will distribute the rule now. And you have your amendments all ready to go here? The chair will be in receipt of a motion.
Mr. Chairman,
Oh, sorry.
could I ask a question?
Sure, of course.
Before you make a motion here? Because I'm considering a substitute motion here. If indeed we had a closed rule, would I be able to get back here later on Monday?
Let me just say the answer to that is no. There may be other reasons that you might be able to get back here later, and the fact that a lot of people are complaining about the arrival time and the plan for meeting would have a greater impact than our having a closed rule on this.
So
on this
Pioneers
measure.
Day,
So
it's still open here, huh?
yeah, I just know from being in a number of meetings and discussions that there's a lot of concern about the prospect of being here earlier in the day on Monday than so I don't know exactly what's going to happen. Now, let's get back to the motion and hope that Mr. Bishop doesn't offer a substitute. So recognize the gentlewoman from Grandfather Community.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move the committee grant H.R. 2584, the Interior, Environment, and Related Agencies Appropriations Act 2012, an open rule. The rule provides for 1 hour of general debate on the rule, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The amendment printed in Section 2 of the resolution, striking Section 427 of the bill, shall be considered as adopted. The rule waives points of order against provisions in the bill for failure to comply with Clause 2 of Rule 21. The rule provides that the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. The rule authorizes the chair to accord priority in recognition to members who have pre-printed their amendments in the congressional record. Finally, the rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions.
You've heard the motion of the gentlewoman. Any amendments, Ms. Slaughter?
I have one, yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to strike the waiver of Clause 2 of Rule 21 from the rule. This would expose the numerous and damaging legislative riders to points of order on the floor.
You've heard the motion of the gentlewoman. Those in favor of the Slaughter amendment will say aye. Those
Aye.
opposed, no.
No.
Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Sessions, Ms. Fox.
No.
Ms. Fox, no. Mr. Bishop. No. Mr. Bishop, no. Mr. Woodall. No. Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Nugent. No. Mr. Nugent, no. Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Webster. Mr. Webster, no. Ms. Slaughter.
Aye.
Ms. Slaughter, aye. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings. Aye. Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis. Aye. Mr. Polis, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No. And the clerk report the total.
4 yeas, 7 nays.
And the amendment is not agreed to. Are there further amendments? Mr. McGovern.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule. I move that the rule be amended so that an amendment offered by me to end the oil and gas subsidies be made in order, and that this amendment be granted the necessary waivers. Mr. Chairman, there were at least 25 riders here that we know of, and we're told that there may be even more. And they span the subject matter quite incredibly in terms of how they impact our environment. So what I'm saying is that given the mishmash of riders, that this certainly should be controversial to be made in order, and we should be able to have a vote up or down on the House floor.
For the motion of the gentleman, any further discussion?
Just very briefly,
Mr. Hastings is recognized.
I certainly agree with Mr. McGovern's motion and hope that we will pass it, largely for the reason that all of us know that oil and gas companies have benefited greatly from public land. And in these economic times, they should be at the front of the line in trying to undertake to do something meaningful to help with the budgetary constraints.
Vote occurs on the McGovern amendment. Those in favor,
Could I just ask if Mr. McGovern had chosen to serve on the Appropriations Committee instead of the Rules Committee, would he be able to make that amendment?
Yes, he certainly
It
would
be
have.
protected there?
Yes,
Just as an option.
He certainly would be able to as a member of the Appropriations
If
Committee.
as a member of the Appropriations Committee, you would have been able to have that amendment protected in the basis.
Well, assume that the Appropriations Committee had reported, as assuming that the Appropriations Committee reported out. Would the gentleman like to be recognized?
As a member of the Rules Committee, I should...
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Worcester, Mr. McGovern.
Member of the Rules.
Almost, the pronunciation is almost there, but
I
not
know,
quite.
I know. Well, I'm working on it. I'm working on it.
I got
You mean I should the chair doesn't recognize the gentleman? Is that what I should have said? Oh, okay. I just want to make sure.
But anyway, as a member of the Rules Committee, I should be able to have this amendment protected. I mean, in fact, it's because of the Rules Committee that all these riders on the Appropriations Bill are being protected. So this is, this shouldn't be controversial.
The vote occurs on the McGovern amendment. Those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Paying the chair the noes have it. Those clerk call the roll.
Mr. Sessions, Ms. Fox. Ms. Fox, no. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop, no. Mr. Woodall. Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Nugent. Mr. Nugent, no. Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Webster. Mr. Webster, no. Ms. Slaughter.
Aye.
Ms. Slaughter, aye. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings.
Before voting, Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to go back to Hugh's son, you and Ms. Slaughter. And
Why don't we do this after the vote? Why don't we do this after the vote rather than the middle of the vote? How's the gentleman recorded?
I vote no.
Gentleman votes no.
Aye.
Oh, okay. Gentleman votes aye.
Whichever one.
Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis.
Aye.
Mr. Polis, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No. And the clerk reports the total.
4 yeas, 7 nays.
And the amendment is not agreed to. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Fort Lauderdale.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to point out that you, Ms. Slaughter, and Mr. McGovern and I were here when he was born, and man, all I can say is time flies.
Isn't that amazing?
Sure does. It sure does. And we're not celebrating his birthday as fathers. He's proud of it. Any further amendments? If not, the vote occurs on the motion of the gentleman from Grandfather Community. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. Please share the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Mr. Bishop will be managing for the majority.
Let's have a roll call.
You want to clerk call or roll?
Mr. Sessions, Ms. Fox. Ms. Fox, aye. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop, aye. Mr. Woodall. Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Nugent. Mr. Nugent, aye. Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott, aye. Mr. Webster. Mr. Webster, aye. Ms. Slaughter.
No.
Ms. Slaughter, no. Mr. McGovern. No. Mr. McGovern, no. Mr. Hastings. Mr. Hastings, no. Mr. Polis. Mr. Polis, no. Mr. Chairman.
Aye. And the clerk report the total.
7 yeas, 4 nays.
And the resolution, the motion is agreed to. And this open rule will be managed on the House floor by the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Bishop,
And by myself.
and Ms. Slaughter.
Minority.
Our schedule is to, our schedule calls for a meeting on the Keystone Pipeline Bill Monday at 3 o'clock. So hope everyone has a great weekend, and without objection, the committee stands adjourned.